Trump wants India, Russia, and the BRICS nations against replacing the US dollar. Is this going to trigger a countdown to a trade war that could reshape international trade as we know it?
Trump threatened 100% tariffs on a group of 9 nations if they try to replace the US dollar.
US President-elect Donald Trump has warned BRICS member countries over attempts to undercut the US dollar. Trump threatened to impose a 100% tariff on the BRICS group nations if they did not commit to not creating a new currency or supporting another currency that will replace the United States dollar.
Hey, look what happened.
Donald Trump has threatened now to impose a 100% tariff on a bunch of countries. The president-elect has threatened this action against the BRICS group of nations, which includes India, if they undercut the US dollar.
US President-elect Donald Trump has threatened to increase 100% import tariffs on all goods from BRICS member countries if the bloc moves ahead with plans to introduce a new BRICS currency.
US President-elect Donald Trump threatens 100% tariff on BRICS nations if they undercut US dollar.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the greatest capitalist in the history.
47th President of the United States.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump.
Trump understands that the possible fall of the US dollar as the world's leading currency could throw the country into a deep economic crisis. This would lead to a severe recession with unemployment skyrocketing and prices soaring. In this study, we will look into how did US dollar become the global currency, why the US wants all nations to trade in US dollars, why countries do not want to trade in US dollars, how much will the US lose if countries stop trading in US dollars, and finally, which countries have started to move away from the US dollar. The US dollar became the world's main currency after the World War II. But this transformation was not instantaneous. It was influenced by several key events.
At Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. Invited by President Roosevelt to the first major world financial meeting since the London Conference of 1933, they will work in the seclusion of this White Mountains resort.
In 1944, representatives from 44 countries convened at the Bretton Woods Conference, and they decided to link other currencies to the US dollar, which was convertible to gold at $35 an ounce. This decision aimed to stabilize economies that had suffered significantly from the war, but it also established the dollar as a cornerstone of international finance.
The reconversion of war plans to peacetime pursuits is going ahead at full speed. And once more, the automobile factories are humming as huge stamping presses form the bodies of the first automobiles produced since the spring of 1942.
After the war, the US economy was strong, but many other countries were struggling to recover. Therefore, this disparity made the dollar a popular choice for international trade. As countries began to rebuild, they relied heavily on the US economy, which consequently helped boost the dollar's status on the global stage.
Most Americans had prospered during the war. They had money now, and they were eager to spend it. Millions of returning veterans got married. That created a demand for new houses and new kitchen appliances. Rationing had ended. Food was plentiful.
The Bretton Woods Agreement also led to the creation of institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which were designed to maintain economic stability, but these institutions also reinforced the dollar's prominence. However, by the 1960s, concerns began to rise about whether the US had sufficient gold reserves to back all its dollars. Therefore, in 1971, President Nixon made the pivotal decision to end the dollar's convertibility to gold, which resulted in floating exchange rates.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
Despite facing challenges from other currencies like the euro and China's RMB, the dollar remains dominant because it is perceived as stable and widely trusted. Therefore, approximately 58% of global reserves are still held in US dollars today, underscoring its enduring influence in international finance. So why do the US want all nations to trade in US dollars? The US dollar plays a significant role in international trade, but this dominance is supported by various economic benefits, historical developments, and strategic political factors. Therefore, this position is crucial not only for the US economy, but also for its global influence, affecting the landscape of international finance and diplomacy.
Why it became so dominant after 1945 is no mystery. You know, the US was the only economy standing. We were far and away the leading exporter. We were far and away the leading foreign investor. Only the United States had deep and liquid financial markets open to the rest of the world. So it made eminent sense for firms and banks and governments and central banks, when they did international transactions, to do them in dollars.
Global reserve currency status. Since the mid-20th century, the US dollar has been recognized as the world's primary reserve currency. But this status comes with significant benefits. Therefore, about 58% of allocated foreign bank reserves are held in dollars, which allows the US government to borrow at lower interest rates. This phenomenon is often referred to as exorbitant privilege, but it enables the US government to sustain larger budget deficits without immediate financial consequences. Consequently, foreign investors consider US Treasury securities to be safe investments. During financial crises such as the 2008 recession, demand for the dollar surged because it was seen as a safe haven, and therefore it helped to reduce interest rates and stabilize the US economy.
One of the criticisms is there is a lot of demand for the US dollar. What does this do to the currency? It leads it to appreciate and to be stronger than other currencies, and the repercussions for the US economy is that it makes US exports less competitive.
The international demand for dollars enhances their value, but this increase in value also enhances American consumers' purchasing power. Therefore, this situation allows US residents to buy imported goods at lower prices. However, it can also lead to higher prices for American exports abroad, potentially reducing their competitiveness in foreign markets. Despite these concerns, the liquidity of US financial markets makes it easy for global entities to convert dollars into other currencies, and therefore this further solidifies the dollar's role in international transactions. The dollar's dominance provides the US with substantial geopolitical leverage, but this leverage comes with responsibilities. Therefore, this influence was evident when the US imposed sanctions on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine, effectively using its control over dollar-dominated transactions to exert economic pressure on Moscow. Such actions illustrate how the dollar enables the US to influence global economic policies, but they also compel other nations to rely on its financial system for international trade.
Dollar dominance allows the United States to impose uniquely powerful financial sanctions. Even though the dollar is used worldwide, almost all dollar payments move through the US banking system. As the United States has legal authority over its banking system, it can bar designated countries, firms, and individuals from using it.
The stability of the US economy, bolstered by a robust legal system and investor protection, fosters trust in the dollar. But this trust is essential for maintaining its status. Therefore, During times of global uncertainty, such as geopolitical tensions or economic downturns, investors typically flock to the dollar for securities. This trust is vital for reinforcing the dollar's use in international trade. The widespread use of the dollar creates network effects that strengthen its position in global markets. But this can complicate the rise of alternative currencies. Therefore, as more businesses engage in transaction using dollars, others are incentivized to follow suit, establishing a self-reinforcing cycle that enhances the dollar's utility and adoption rate. This dynamic makes it difficult for other currencies to achieve similar prominence in international trade. Why countries want to move away from the dollar? Many countries want to stop using the US dollar, but this desire comes from a mix of political, economic, and strategic reasons. Therefore, let's look at the main reasons behind this shift. Weaponization of the dollar. Countries like Russia and Iran have faced tough US sanctions, which have included freezing their dollar assets. This has made them and others want to find alternatives to avoid being vulnerable like that again.
EU freezes €300 billion from Russian central bank. EU Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders said that from his point of view, it would be possible to keep these €300 billion as a guarantee until Russia voluntarily participates in the reconstruction of Ukraine.
Therefore, when Russia had $300 billion in reserves frozen after invading Ukraine, it highlighted the risks of relying on the dollar. Countries and groups like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are talking about using other currencies instead of the dollar. For example, Russia is now trading a lot with China using their RMB instead of dollars.
The US dollar is facing a backlash. The forefront of this is BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, Russia thinks that BRICS should do more, so it has floated the idea of a common currency. Reports say they're working on a proposal which is likely to be taken up in August.
This shows a clear shift towards using different currencies in trade. The strong US dollar has made imports expensive for many developing countries. For instance, Argentina is now trading with China using the yuan instead of the dollar.
Argentina will pay for Chinese imports in yuan instead of US dollars in order to preserve its dwindling foreign reserves, Economy Minister Sergio Massa said.
Therefore, this trend shows that many nations are trying to reduce their dependence on the US currency. As global trade changes, especially with oil and other commodities being priced in currencies other than the dollars, like Russian oil sold in local currencies, there's a strong push for de-dollarization. Therefore, countries feel they need to gain more economic independence from US monetary policy. The amount of US dollars held in global foreign exchange reserves has dropped from over 70% in the early 2000s to about 60% today. This change indicates that central banks are looking to diversify into other currencies and assets like gold. This trend reflects a broader movement away from the dollar dominance.
Some signs of de-dollarization are emerging. This trend is likely to persist. China has been pushing the yuan for bilateral trade. India too has an arrangement with Russia, the rupee-ruble mechanism.
New payment systems are being created that allow for international transactions without using US banks. For example, projects like mBridge connect central banks across Asia and the Middle East without involving the dollar. Therefore, these developments further weaken the dollar's hold on global financial geopolitical tensions, economic pressures on emerging markets, and structural shifts in global finance. These are driving countries to seek alternatives to the US dollar. Therefore, as nations strive for greater economic independence and explore new trading partnerships that don't rely on a dollar-centric system, this trend is likely to continue. How much will the US lose if US dollar is no longer the global currency? The potential decline of the US dollar status as the global reserve currency, often referred to as de-dollarization, presents significant economic implications for the United States.
I hate when countries go off the dollar. I would not allow countries to go off the dollar, because when we lose that standard, that will be like losing a revolutionary war. That will be a hit to our country.
The dollar has long served as the primary currency for international trade and finance, providing the US with substantial leverage in global markets. For instance, Donald Trump has stated that losing this status could feel like losing a war, indicating that it could undermine the dollar's long-standing influence and potentially reduce the US to a status similar to that of a developing nation.
In 2018, Germany's foreign minister wrote in an op-ed that it is essential that we strengthen European autonomy by establishing payment channels independent of the US. And some are hoping the world's future reserve currency won't be tied to a national government at all.
The loss of the dollar's dominance would significantly diminish America's economic power, thereby limiting its ability to impose sanctions and exert international influence. For example, if countries like China and Russia continue to diversify their reserves away from the dollar, the American consumers might face higher costs when traveling abroad or purchasing imports, as these nations would no longer need to hold dollars for transactions. Therefore, inflationary pressures from a weakening dollar could erode purchasing power, making everyday goods and services less affordable for Americans.
In 2001, 73% of the world's reserves were held in US dollars compared to 58% today. This trend has accelerated since Russia's invasion of Ukraine because of the US's decision to freeze Russia's dollar assets.
A decline in the dollar's global role may also lead to decreased foreign investment in US assets, which could lower the performance of US equities and bonds. For instance, if investors perceive other currencies as more stable or attractive, they might choose to withdraw their investments from US markets. Consequently, this could result in higher real yields, discouraging further investment and possibly triggering capital flight as investors seek refuge in more stable currencies. The US heavily relies on its currency's reserve status to finance its budget and trade deficits. However, losing the status could cause interest rates to rise as the government struggles to attract buyers for its debt, exacerbating existing fiscal challenges. Moreover, countries might form new trading blocs that bypass the dollar altogether, which could alter global economic dynamics and diminish US influence in international affairs. Which countries are moving away from the US dollar? Countries are starting to look for ways to trade without using the US dollar, and this trend is called de-dollarization. But why is this happening? There are many reasons, including frustration with US monetary policies and the impact of sanctions. Therefore, several countries are taking steps to reduce their reliance on the US dollar.
Countries are ditching dollars to avoid being bullied by sanctions. This is proving U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's words right when she said sanctions are causing de-dollarization.
China is using its own currency, the RMB, more in international trade. But in March 2023, something surprising happened. RMB payments overtook US dollar payments for the first time, making up over 52% of transactions. Therefore, China is also making deals with countries like Saudi Arabia to settle oil payments in RMB. After facing US sanctions, Russia decided to trade using currencies other than the US dollar. But now about 25% of its international trade is done in RMB, and it's even trading oil in local currencies. Therefore, Russia is working with Iran to create a new monetary system that relies less on the dollar. In March 2023, Brazil and China agreed to trade using their own currencies instead of the US dollar. But this move shows that Brazil is not alone. Many BRIC nations are following suit. India wants to use its currency, the rupee, more in global trade.
India is the 5th largest economy in the world. It aims to become the 3rd largest in this decade. So we're talking about a global power, which means you cannot depend on foreign currencies. You need something more reliable, like a globalized Indian rupee.
The Indian government has set a goal to increase how much trade is done in rupees instead of dollars. Turkey is trying to reduce its dependence on the US dollar by discussing local currency trading with China. But these strategies are still in the early stages. Due to US sanctions, Iran is looking for alternatives like the euro and digital currencies for trade. But it wants to avoid using traditional financial systems that rely heavily on the dollar.
Several developing economies, including Brazil, Argentina, Iraq, and Pakistan, have announced their willingness to accept yuan payments in trade with China. There are also media reports that Saudi Arabia is considering using yuan for oil trade with China.
Venezuela announced back in 2018 that it would price its oil in currencies other than the US dollar, such as euros and yuan. But this was part of a larger strategy to escape economic isolation. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand are also talking about reducing their reliance on the US dollar. In January 2023, Saudi Arabia's minister said they might be open to trading in currencies other than the dollar. Bolivia is also thinking about using China's yuan for international trade because it has been facing liquidity issues with the US dollar. The United States has reacted strongly to these moves away from the dollar. President Donald Trump warned BRICS nations against creating alternative currencies or moving away from the dollar.
Trump threatened 100% tariffs on a group of 9 nations if they try to replace the US dollar.
Trump threatened a potential 100% tariff on goods from those countries if they did not comply. Therefore, he emphasized that such actions could put their access to the US market at risk. The US sees these efforts as a challenge to its economic power and influence worldwide. Analysts believe if these trends continue, there could be a significant shift in global economic power dynamics. If other countries stop using the dollar, the US would struggle to pay its debts, forcing it to make painful cuts that would harm public services and lower living standards. This dramatic change wouldn't just weaken the America's economy, it would also diminish its power on the global stage, making it more vulnerable to other nations that might seize the opportunity to rise in influence. Have I missed anything? What do you have to say about this global shift that could happen very soon? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.